We're officially live on Facebook for the B2B Community Builder Show. I'm your host and Chief Executive Connector, Pablo Gonzalez. We are here because the world has opened up again. I don't know if you guys got the memo, but COVID seems to be retreating some. There are in-person experiences. We're going back to humanity. And as we are doing this experiential marketing, brand activations, trade show activations that feel like immersive experiences is something that are both happening in person and online. And when I met Matt Kleinrock, I had never met anybody that was so forward thinking about it, right? Like most of my experience at trade shows, at these types of booths is me trying to make best friends with everybody and everybody just feeling like they have to be there and there's some kind of like hostage. And yet I met somebody that is extremely passionate about it, forward thinking about it, has been in the game for a long time, is more passionate about pizza than anybody I've ever met, incredibly competitive athlete, and had to have him on the show. Matt Kleinrock, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks, buddy. That's a nice intro. Don't get me going on pizza because I don't think we have the time, honestly.
I know. I was there.
And I don't need more text messages from Kim again about it because she was enamored with it. And
Kim, Amanda, my wife, like everybody at that table, table is really impressed. So, all right. So we're going to do for brand experiences what you have done for pizza to the folks that are here with us today. And as I like to always do, I like to welcome the audience. Introduce yourself. This is a live internet talk show. It's made for you to get value. If you got a question, you want to go back and forth with Matt about something that you want to pick his brain on, I welcome you on the stage. If not, use the Q&A, use the chat, and you can be part of this thing. We repurpose this. You can be LinkedIn famous. So welcome, Brian. Welcome, Karen. Welcome, Lee Bishop, the MVP of the Not Your Average Investor Community. Welcome, Lori. I see that you made it. Good to have you back. Welcome, Molly. Welcome, Peter. Welcome, Charla. Matt, I like to dive right into it, man. You know, we've talked about this whole, it's not necessarily a brand experience inside a trade show. And it's also not necessarily not a brand experience just because it's a trade show. Let's talk about, there's going to be a lot of overlap in our conversation today, but I would like to kind of like draw a line of what is not a brand experience when you're talking about a trade show booth. So then we can talk about well done trade show booths, and then we can go outside of the trade show.
Yeah, good question. So I would say, unfortunately, I think a lot of trade show booths, if you walk the average trade show and are on the average trade show floor, you know, you're giving people space, whether it's 100 square feet, 200 square feet, 400 square feet, 800 square feet and beyond, right? You're buying space, and not enough companies, and even companies like ourselves that are building these spaces for people are at fault as well. It's really not creating brand experiences, right? The trade show booth, to an extent, has gotten stale. I mean, if you go on the show floor and walk through, it's not a whole lot grabbing your attention, right? It's not a whole lot of wow. Occasionally, a lot of the bigger shows, you do find some great stuff, but typically when you see a brand experience on the trade show floor, it is very easy to spot one that is really intentfully done, really immersive in terms of that brand. And, you know, I would say kind of has like a buzz going around it.
Got it. I think that's the buzz thing is always easy to figure out, right? It's always like that thing that people are walking. There's always kind of like a slowdown in the traffic somewhere around there because people are at least given a second look at it. And then you see when people engage. You want to give me an example of a well done trade show booth that pulls off this immersive brand example so we can kind of paint a picture of what that can look like?
Yeah, I would say one of the best ones I've seen is one we chatted just briefly about, and you know, it was at the Kitchen and Bath Show, and I believe it was early February in Orlando, a company called Monogram. And I was on the show floor. Look, I've been on a lot of show floors, and I mean, the booth absolutely just grabbed my attention just from the way the exterior was designed, right? It just had a presence about it. And then interestingly enough, it drew my attention to go over there. And as I went over there, just some of the features and things that they were doing was just incredible. And I don't even know who built it, designed it, strategized it, but the overall layout was incredible, right? The brand experience, their brand, you know, halo lit logos had this real black, sort of dark, yet earthy features to it with greenery. It had a kitchen, like this real nice Napa Valley kitchen that was outside, that was, sorry, not outside, but it was like on the edge of the booth. So it's like you could see the kitchen and there was a live something going on, right? You had a bunch of people sitting at the beautiful bar. You had a person with a headset on. They were like wine tasting food. It looked like an incredible time. And that was a part of their experience in there, right? Which I thought was real interesting. That was on display. And then there was an entrance way where you walked in, looked like a red carpet. And then, of course, kind of like a side entrance to get back into the experience. I don't even know what was back there because I didn't get to go in. I would have loved to have gone in, but the layout, the exterior, the entire brand experience, and then, of course, having those engagement factors, and then having an engagement factor like that on display, I thought was even cooler.
I think the cool kids these days call that it was a whole mood, right? Like you're kind of describing, like as you describe it, I'm thinking, man, this feels like a speakeasy. You're talking about lighting.
Yeah.
You're talking about somebody kind of like performing in it. You're talking about multiple levels of access and something that gives you this like yearning.
It didn't look usual. Like when you walk a trade show floor, so many exhibits are parodies of themselves. You know what I mean? It's like it's the same thing over and over and over and over and over, just with a little bit different of a logo, right? This was you said brand experience. This was a brand experience. It looked like no other exhibit on the floor. It looked like their booth, their brand, and it looked like an experience that they created for their guests, their customers, their attendees, whoever it was. So I was really impressed with it.
Awesome, man. And like we kind of broke this down in our prior conversation, but like the things that I identify that to me are humanly very experiential, right? Like the things that I've learned through nonprofits and all these different events that we've had. One, the cooking demonstration, this idea of food will always join people. So you see a lot of people catering, but the idea of preparing food together or watching someone prepare food has another level of kind of like connection and interactivity.
Has more experience to it, right? It looked like a dining experience. Like, you know how people go to like a cooking class thing and you do wine and you bake and you cook. Yeah. It just had an experience factor.
That's cool. And then the other thing, the two things that I love talking about often in marketing, right, is this how Instagrammable is something, right? Like I saw this with the Museum of Ice Cream. Like, I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe that somebody pulled off this business model and now you see it everywhere. And then the velvet rope, man, which the Museum of Ice Cream does really well. This idea that's like, you can come in, but you can't. And that makes you really, really want to go in. Right? Like, how do you pull that off? Like what is the key to creating kind of like the exclusiveness, but still being open enough to have people in?
So I think the exclusiveness piece really depends on what your strategy is for the show, right? I can guarantee any company designing and building a booth like the one I described, they have a strategy behind this, right? So I could actually argue the opposite, that building something so exclusive could actually deter people away, because most people are not going to walk up and be like, hey, how do I get in here? It's not how it works. So my guess is that they were booking people for this experience, that they were upfront marketing, getting out there, and this was all booked out. So they didn't need to draw people in, right? The whole trade show thing is always like, create a space to draw people in. Well, they didn't need to draw people in, maybe because they did their job before they got to the show. And then they've created this private experience to bring people in and navigate and walk them through it. So I think it really depends. And then when it comes to like the private, like the velvet rope type thing and like an Instagrammable moment, it's like, how are you going to create something that's, I'd say, memorable and interesting enough to take a picture in front of, right? You have to, like, the test is, what did the guy say? I was just at EMS, the CMO from Pepsi. He said the bullshit test, right? He said, does it pass the bullshit test? So it's like, if you're going to come up with something that's Instagrammable, it's the idea of like, would you take a picture there? If you were at this event or you were at this trade show or you were in this trade show booth, would you want to take a selfie or ask a person to take a picture of you there?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. But too many people are, and I love this topic because it's just marketing, right? Like all the same mistakes in marketing happen in experiential marketing, right? So it's people will love to set up a Instagram booth for you to take a picture next to the thing that they want to promote, as opposed to something cool that you actually want to take a picture in front of, right? Like make it about the customer.
You got to know your customer, right? So it's all, yes, it is about those people, the attendee, the benefitter, the customer, whoever it is. A lot of people want to do what they think, what they like, what they find what they think is cool or just their opinion. But really, if you've done the homework, if you understand your customer, you're really building everything around them, because that's what it's all about. That's why you're there, right? So no, I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, love it. All right. So we've reached kind of critical mass. We got more than 10 people on the call today. We're doing something different, right? This is a 2-part series with Matt, where we are talking about these experiential, immersive brand experiences. This part is about setting them up, right? It's about doing your own brand experience. Part 2 is happening in 2 weeks, where we're going to talk about how to network, how to build bonds at those experiences, right? And the reason why I bring it up is because normally I have an ongoing show that people show up to. I think I'm hearing from Jesse right now in the chat. Yeah, we switched up the webinar link because I wanted to do this special with Matt's audience and my audience. So if you are a regular on the show, then for this week and in 2 weeks, and I made this really unnecessarily complicated, but in 2 weeks and this week, this is the link. If you are new here, you're going to be here today and in 2 weeks. But if you want to come to other shows, we have other shows that happen. We'll talk about that later. I just wanted to set expectations. And Matt, now that we've, gotten out of my own way here, there is a lot of commonality between this stuff. And what I'm hearing from you is strategy, right? Like you are great at this, like framework for trade shows or brand builder experiences of the things that you need to do going into this.
Yeah.
What are the key points that people need to think about strategically before one of these live event experiences that they need to have taken care of?
Yeah. So we try to keep it somewhat simple, but I do believe a simple framework. So, we're talking trade shows, either you're exhibiting or you're creating your own trade show, right? Events, sponsoring an event, exhibiting at an event. Maybe you're creating your own event. Maybe you have your own show that you're putting on, brand activations. Anytime you're taking a brand and bringing it out to the customer in any way, shape, or form, right? So the first thing I think you need to be thinking about is the why. Okay, so why are you doing this? What is the purpose, right? That's like numero uno. If you know that, you start there. That's, as Jerry says, and I use this all the time now, that is the North Star, right? It makes so much sense to me. The second is the customer. Who is the customer? Who's the attendee? Who's the benefiter, right? You have to know them in detail. You have to know them in depth. What do they want in context to this, right? Like you could come up with all these things about who these people are, but I don't care that they're a dad, right? I care about this because it's in context with the event, in context with the trade show, the activation, whatever it may be. And if that activation has to do with like Mother's Day, well, then I care that they're a mother, right? So my point is, when it comes to the customer, you really have to dial down all the way to the events and specifically what is in context with that. The third is the brand. That's your brand. If you're putting on a trade show booth, an event, whatever it may be, really run through your brand. Really get an idea of what makes your brand different. Who are you as a brand? Too many brands, I said, there's too much parity. There's not enough personality. There's not enough uniqueness. So really dial into what your brand is, how it can stand out, and how it can be uniquely yours. The fourth is sort of the engagement experience factor. You have to engage people. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. There needs to be engagement. So based on the why, based on the customer, based on your brand, how do you want to engage people? Okay. Experience is another one in the engagement factor, which goes to, okay, I'm an ideal customer. I'm an ideal attendee. I walk up to your trade show booth or I come to your event. What do you want my experience to be? Right. And then the last is your goals and your objectives. So as you start to build a trade show booth, an event, a brand activation, any of these live in-person, I don't even care if it's a digital experience, right? We've built those for people as well. But what happens is they take time to build. There's a lot of conversation. There's a lot of ideas. There's a lot of people involved. But if you don't have this foundation to say, hey, that's an awesome idea, but does it go back to our why, our customer, our brand, the engage, you know what I mean? It helps you build, it gives you these principles to go back to, to make sure that what you are building is really in line with your goals. And those are all based on the why, the customer, your brand, and that you're not missing the mark.
Awesome, man. Awesome 5-step framework. Why, who your client is, the uniqueness of your brand, how you're going to engage, and what are the goals. I want to dive into these for a little bit, maybe for another 10, 13 minutes. And then the last half hour, I want to spend outside of the trade show booth in the customer's backyard, right? What's the difference between the why and the goals? Is there ever a disconnect between those? Or okay, tell me.
No, but okay. So I think yes, it's easy that there can be a disconnect. So I think goals are very easy to jump into, where someone could say, well, I want to do A, B, and C, right? But then those goals get kind of like vague. And I think from my experiences, when you go through the why, the customer, the brand, the engagement experience, goals then become easier to set, and they can be more specific to set versus these vague goals. Why? I think you constantly need a why. I think you constantly need a purpose for what you're doing. Okay. So to me, they're different, right? Like we have a why in our business, right? If you're a business, you have a why, you have a purpose, you have a mission, and then you have goals. You have goals quarterly, monthly, yearly. I don't think an event is any different, right? Your why can vary depending on, are you running a specific event, a single isolated event? Are you running a series of trade shows? Is the why all the same? Is it an individual trade show? We have customers that are in multiple verticals. So the questions that come up is, okay, almost each trade show is uniquely different. Their why becomes totally different. One trade show or event could be geared toward prospects, people they don't know, and that they're, looking to engage with, educate, and build brand awareness. Another one could be specifically with their current customers. It's a totally different ballgame. So I think separating why and the goals and starting with why really leads you down the right path.
Okay, makes sense. That cleared it up for me, right? So if I'm hearing you correctly and I'm punting the ball down a little down the field, I don't know if that's the right analogy, but I hear a couple different whys, right? A why can be we want to generate leads. A why can be we want to generate brand awareness. A why.
And that's not a goal, right? I mean,
correct. Yeah.
It's too vague to be a goal.
Yeah, you got it. So another why might be I need people to come touch my stuff, right? Like maybe you have a product that you want to get
physical product.
Hands.
You need to get you need to get their hands on it. And then goals that then allow you to dial in and be more specific, because look, you're going to spend all this money, time, energy, effort. And then when you set goals, we're not setting 10 goals. We're setting 3. Okay. And then the other piece of that goals is setting objectives. So if it's leads that you want, if it's revenue you want to create, okay, we'll set some numbers, but then also objective wise, how are we going to set these meetings? They don't just happen, right? So that's where it starts from the why to the goal to the objectives, and you can really dial down and say, these are the activities that we have to do at this event to create the success that we're looking for.
Love that. I think that if anybody is listening to this on the podcast, I recommend that you join us live one of these days, but that's a takeaway right there, right? Like, I think if you can implement a why and some goals around this event, you're going to be further ahead than most people that go to a trade show. They're just like, I just have to be there kind of thing. Let's talk about uniqueness of the brand. I imagine that as the designer of the space, this might be somewhere that your team has a lot of fun. Can you give me some kind of like ideas of how to incorporate that type of stuff? Is it always about a big spend? Is there other things that you can do? Give me some ideas.
So big spend versus not big spend. Look, I think there's one of the ways you can differentiate is that when you're in, say, a 10 by 20, 20 by 20, not massive spaces, but good size in a trade show sense, right? Is do the exercise, go through everything, really create a brand experience and a brand environment, right? Because so many people are not. That's number one. I think when it comes to brands, we get caught in the middle sometimes when we're working with our customers, because sometimes they have internal graphic design departments. Sometimes they have like a marketing agency that does their graphic design for them. We typically find that a lot of graphic designers, as good as they can be, are not really experienced in, say, trade show and event graphic design, these big structures that interconnect and are 360 or 180, not how to put these graphics together. But I would say is be true to yourself, be true to your brand. Don't try to be like something else, right? A good example is we have a customer of ours, And they've always used this sort of like medieval army type, like army of data type thing. I love it. I'm like, go medieval. You utilize the knights and the swords and the dark and all that, because there's no other brand like that on the show floor. It's uniquely theirs. And then when you ask them about it, first of all, it's conversation starter. Second, it's theirs and they can respond and answer to it. But if they don't, if they go and they soften it, and then there's a disconnect with their brand. So be unique, figure out what is yours as a brand. I had a good conversation on LinkedIn about this with Kurt Thomas from QPAC. Yeah. And he asked me about mine, and it really got me turning about Rockway, So I kind of, I wrote this whole thing out to him about how I would do it based on our brand. So I think it is about being uniquely yours.
How would you do it based on your brand?
Okay, what did I talk about? I talked about our blue. Our color blue is a bold color, right? And we are a bolder brand. We say be bold, right? Our logo, this rectangle, right? This would be used often throughout the entire setup. We obviously have rock. Our name is very unique. We would certainly play off of our name, because I think that's something that people remember all the time. Even if they screw it up a little bit and they say Rockaway, it's always pretty close. So just things like that I think you have to find about yourself that are unique about your brand. And you have to really kind of ride them into the ground, honestly.
Cool, man. Yeah. You identified a couple of things that I want to pick out, right? Like whether your brand has a certain color, you can have that throughout the booth. Whether your brand has like a specific shape or a logo, how that's spread out. You also identified dressing up, right? Like I think dressing up is a underrated thing. Our boy, actually, I don't know if you know Brad Whitchurch, right? But like Seal Shield, Russ's boss.
I don't know Brad, but I know.
But I talk to him. I talk about him all the time to you, right? So so they all dress in like blue scrubs for the medical convention. They started doing that. That stood out.
Theirs.
Yeah, uniquely theirs. You're talking about props, right? Like if you're like an army of whatever, everybody can maybe like Spartan helmets or different kinds of things, and then you can gamify the whole thing. If you have that language or you have something that you're associated with, you can create some kind of experience around that based on what you are having people experience, right? So that's all unique characteristics that you kind of like called out in different ways. I like that. Our move that we've done for people and that we do for ourselves is that we take a booth and we create a kind of mini podcast scenario at a booth. And what that does, it's surprisingly simple to do, right? Like all you need is a fancy camera, some lights, and a background that will make it look like a TV set and a couple of microphones, right? So it's pretty inexpensive. If you get the camera guy to do it and you get the background, it can go with whatever booth you already have. And what we do is we tell clients to pick out maybe like 15 to 20 people that are going to be at that show and reach out to them ahead of time and say that you're going to be shooting the thought leaders of XYZ conference at the show. And then what we do is we engineer this like interview script so that you're asking them, and it's kind of all the same, right? Like you can do this yourself. The interview is basically, what problem do you solve? How'd you figure out it was important? What have you learned since? How does it tie to the show? And then future pacing, what's the future of this industry? Or if you want to bring up something in specific that you want people to learn about, right? So now what happens is that this whole like create an experience thing, right? People walking past, see the lights and see a camera, and they wonder thinking, who's on TV, right? So it stops the traffic of the flow and people stand around. When your sales floor is out on the show floor and they meet someone interesting, it's like, oh, that's really interesting. You should come back to the booth and talk to my CEO about and be on the thought leaders of XYZ conference, right? So they go do that. They provide that experience. So now your sales team is like, you get in an interesting conversation. You say, come back to the booth. Let's have you on the podcast, right? So people are like, oh, great. They now come and set up and have a 15-minute, you know this play, right? We've talked about this. They come back and have this like nice experience, right? Like they engage with your booth, this dream buyer. They get interviewed. And while they're there, you're taking a picture of them in front of a microphone and some headsets, and it looks like they were on TV. So they're going to show their friends. We also go as far as having our editing team in the background. We'll turn it around overnight because we know the flow of the interview. We'll turn it around and give them a sizzle reel the next day. Yeah. So that way your salespeople are following up with a sizzle reel for them that then has them posted on LinkedIn. You're winning the conference online, but you're also getting their phone number that day because you're texting them that picture. And then when you follow up with everybody, is a differentiated follow-up, right? It's not like I scanned your badge. It's, hey, we're going to release your podcast. You want to get on a call and talk about how cool it was, right? So that was kind of, I was asking you about engagement techniques, and I just gave basically our best engagement technique.
Well, I love that play though. It is a great play because it does a lot of things, right? It garners attention, which you have to be able to do. Number one, right? It has insight, education to it. It has a touch point after the show. I mean, it does so many good things on the show floor, especially when you're trying to start conversations with people. I mean, it's absolutely a great play.
Your stamp of approval is very important to me, man. So I appreciate that. So that's my one move, right? Like I'm like the Randy Johnson slider, dude. What are other good like engagement techniques? We talk about the cooking demonstration and the velvet rope.
Yeah.
Have you seen any other good like ways to engage and cross that like fishbowl feeling?
Yeah, so I've certainly seen good presentations and bad presentations, right? So creating a space to present and then having people with the ability to present, I think is key. That's one. So depending what kind of presentation you would want to give, that's a way of garnering attention. I've seen presentation areas that are packed with people in an exhibit space to where people are pouring out into the aisle. And I have seen presentation areas where there's nobody in there. And it's just boring. I mean, it's just boring, right? It just looks terrible. The other thing is product. Product is super interesting. How do you display your product? How do you get it in people's hands? How do you let them utilize it, right? If you have a product that does a physical action, are you actually letting those people do something with it, right? Are you actually letting them utilize that in a setting that makes sense? I would say those two are great engagement pieces, depending on what it is that you do. But I've always loved the presentation part. I think the presentation part allows you to market prior. It also allows you to market after. Same thing like you talked about with the live show and the sessions. It really gives you the touch points before and after that you're trying to get them to, and then hopefully create a crowd.
That's good stuff, man. That's good stuff. You also, you on a past really good podcast on the Business Growth Accelerator by Isar Matis over here in the audience. You mentioned this idea that you've got a buddy that has a friend that's just like super gregarious and outgoing.
Yeah.
And he just brings him to conferences because he knows he's going to be out there recruiting people. Tell me about that. Cause that's obviously my favorite.
Oh my God. That guy. That's a great one. Yeah. I mean, it's just a guy. He's a sales guy, a very successful guy. One of the best personalities anybody I've ever met. He's just hard to dislike. He can talk to a wall. And a friend of mine has a product, has a company. He goes to one trade show a year. He brings them, takes them with him. He's like, you're coming with me for 3 days. And just that really goes back to a whole nother point, which is that when these companies are going to trade shows and events, you have to really consider who you're bringing, who's the staff in the booth, right? What kind of personalities do you have? Because when you are there, it is about networking. You could have a beautiful booth and you could be, at your trade show and at your event, and still doesn't mean you're going to drive incredible results. But having some personalities, having some people willing to take risks, have conversations, and I'd say the right way. I've seen people be like aggressive on the show floor and kind of awkward. But when you have the right people and you have a game plan and you have opening questions to open people up and what experience and how to move them through the experience once you've engaged them, rather than just completely winging it, which is what most people do, you can really do well.
Awesome, man. All right. So now I want to emphasize, first of all, the idea that that's a really low cost way to just like up your game. Like I have a friend, Whitney Ritchie. She's literally hired me to do the same thing. If you bring a hype man that just like is able to like shake hands and bring people in and introduce people, like whoever your most outgoing buddy is, that is an easy way for a startup to just like level up, add a network. And to be honest, man, I often recommend that to people before they even buy a booth, right? Like, it's just like, show up to an event and just like make friends with everybody before you drop this huge investment sometimes. But that brings me to the idea that we may not need trade shows, right? Like where the world is going and where this conversation is going of brand experiences are exclusive of the trade show environment, because I guess I'll let you explain it, right? But like there is a devaluation of the actual like trade show. Do you want to kind of like talk through that?
Yeah. So I would say that trade shows are just unique in the sense now that, like, if you think about 10 years ago, 15 years ago, when the internet wasn't as evolved as it was. I mean, what's the value proposition of a trade show, right? Well, it's an association, a third party that is bringing everybody together. They're doing that for you. Well, essentially, with the way the internet works now, you can find anybody, you can look anybody up, you can find people that didn't exist, you can get the contacts of the people that you need. So essentially, that third party bringing all these people together, that value prop is kind of diminishing. And I think really what it's shifting to, the value proposition of trade shows and events, and the people that are running them, the associations, the general contractors that put on the whole thing, is they need to create better experiences, right? Overall, because the attendees and the exhibitors are the ones that are floating the boat, right? They make the whole thing go, the almighty dollar, right? And how far is their dollar going for the value that they're giving? And then what's the experience for everybody? So I think the trade shows, and again, I don't run and put the trade shows on. We work with the brand, we work with the company. So for us, you want to go to a trade show, we'll help you create a brand experience to go get results based on that show. You want to create your own event because you think a trade show is too much money and you think you can do a better job with a smaller event that you run yourself, we'll help you strategize and build out that event. So we don't care. But I do think the trade shows, not only say have a long way to go, they have an evolution process that's going to have to happen, because brands are smart. Companies, they know what they're doing with their dollar eventually. And I do believe experience will win. You know, look at everything we're talking about. What leads the way in events? Consumer events lead the way, right? Yeah. South by Southwest, Burning Man, Dreamforce, I wouldn't say is a consumer event, but that's kind of one that's getting it right. But the consumer events really lead the way because it's all about experience all the time. And B2B events and trade shows need to get there fast.
Yeah. And inherently, if the whole value is an arbitrage for something that is now easy for every person to arbitrage, you're going to start losing a little bit of edge. And what I mean is, like, if the whole value of the trade show association was to amass the audience, and now us as people can amass our own audience with Zoom info and LinkedIn, that level of cost is going to start getting to cut out, and it opens the door for companies like yours or mine, or even big, you know, obviously big companies can do whatever they want, right? Salesforce, perfect example, but it opens the door to have your own experiences. So before we go straight into brand experiences, Deb Shell, who, by the way, is amazing. She just dropped a link in the chat where she takes notes at all our calls. And like, you can watch her taking notes. So we post this when we publish the podcast, but shout out to Deb, who's awesome at doing that. She is a Mighty Networks consultant, right? Like, she's a how to use a Mighty Networks community group. Yeah. She's got a question. I'm curious about the current market fit for longer events, like a summit or conference virtually. Do you think it is more common for people to secure a sponsor instead of charging per person? If so, do you have a place to point for someone who wants to figure out how to get a sponsor for an event? So you talked about how kind of like the client at the end of the day is the sponsor and the person, right? So, yes. And she's sitting there in the middle thinking, how can, if she wants to put on her own event, what is the move these days to, like, try to get it sponsored or to try to get an audience to pay for it? What are you starting to see with that?
Man, I mean, look, I think if you're going to make the move to run your own event, you really have to decide what kind of event you want, right? Sometimes starting small and very niche is a great way to go, because how are you going to get people to sponsor something that doesn't have any proven value to it? You're really going to have to sell it. Now, look, if you can sell it and go get sponsors, you better bring them value. So I would say if you can get sponsors to help float the boat to get the event, 100%, it's a no-brainer, but you need to be prepared to now bring value to the sponsor plus value to the attendees that are coming. And at the end of the day, mapping what that event really should be and what that experience should be for everybody is ultimately the most important thing. Far too many conferences are underfunded, don't bring enough value, lack education, because all the education is done by the sponsors. So the sponsors are pitching themselves, right? Yeah. So they kind of get reverse engineered where they don't have enough budget. But they're also not providing an experience that people will pay for or more for. So I would say, look, if you can get sponsors, yes, always. But now your attention goes two ways. How do I provide value to these sponsors so they want to continue to sponsor? Because from a lot of the events I go to, a lot of sponsors, they question their sponsorship year after year after year. So you have to make them undoubtedly not question it, or simply just run an event where the attendees are paying for this event by the value that you're driving in a very singular focus.
Good stuff, man. Great advice. Deb, I would say I totally agree with Matt's advice of like keeping it small if this is what you're doing, and try to just drive a lot of value for attendees. I find that I make up for value by content, right? Like every sponsor would love a well-made piece about them. If you can create some kind of advertisement about them for being part of your show, and it's fully serving them, not just your show, but makes them look like a big deal because they sponsored your show, and or makes them look like they were surrounded by 20 people because there was only 20 people there, but it made it look really, really good, right? Like content is one of those things that can like add a little bit of value to both sides of the equation, whether it is the attendee or it is the sponsor. That's always been my trick. Jesse has the perfect question to the leap off point, right? Brand experiences. Jesse is asking, and Jesse has a green building consulting company that he's the head of marketing for down in Miami.
Nice. Very cool.
Yeah. So he's asking, what are unique ways to hold a singular event of your own that will interest people to attend and engage them without going to a third party trade show? He's basically asking, what is a brand experience that you can create on your own? Give us a couple examples of what you're seeing.
Okay. So first thing first is, like we said, the why and deciding who. So if you're going to create your own event, who are you bringing there? And then you can get an idea of that sample size, how many people is possible, and who specifically are you targeting? I think the more specific, the more niche, the better, right? Because then you can really build the whole thing around what they would want. It goes back to what we said earlier. If you're building something that you think is cool, well, ultimately, you really don't know if people are going to love it or want to be there, or when they get there, what that's going to be like. It does need to be a fully immersive experience. And that experience also has to tie into, is there education? What kind of speakers? How easy is the in and out of the event? Knowing where to go, the sessions, lunches? Do you set things up, so people can network? Like, how easy are you making this event for people? How fluid, how smooth? You're creating break times. I mean, you can go into a million different things, but really, the event at the end of the day has to be tailored to the people that are going there. And I think a lot of events get away from that. They're not really considering the event to be something start to finish, completely tailored. It gets too broad, lacks budget, because when you don't get the experience, you're not going to get people to pay to be there, or as much as you'd like.
Okay. Makes sense. Deb's got a good question here. How do you validate an event before deciding to offer it? Like, what's the leap off point to know if it's going to be worth your while to pull off your own brand experience?
It's a great question. I would say certain signs, right? Are you going to trade shows and seeing people disinterested? Are you hearing, I have a client of ours that created their own by being at their trade shows and finding that there was a niche. There was something there. There's these conversations that are happening. People are like, we should really be talking about this. And, there's a whole thing for people in this space. So I think it's listening, and whether it's for customers or whoever you're creating this for, it's a little bit of like qualitative analysis, right? Listening to feedback. What are people talking about? What are they yearning for? What are they missing? And then trying to deliver something that you think could be impactful in that sense. But yeah, I would say certainly observing, listening, being a part of association, your trade shows and your events. I think that's huge. Sorry, I'm having a phone issue again.
It's okay, man. It's okay. Hey, would you say that a good first step is to have your own brand experience during somebody else's event? Like, is that like a good leap off point from the companies that you work with, or do the companies you work with just like go all in immediately?
Yeah. I think certainly being able to create something off of an event or at an event is huge, right? Because you're getting that immediate feedback. Is anybody else doing this? Where are those conversations going? What's being discussed? A lot of times these shows they're too broad.
There's a lot of spaces and channels in there for creating niche stuff. A lot of times I think people are going to events and there's so many verticals and little markets inside. Maybe there are engineers that, that need their own form of education, where the engineers could be totally branched off. So you can create your own event because your customers are the engineers and they're being left behind in this big event. So you can create your own. Certainly test piloting it at an event that's larger, established, and already moving. I mean, yeah, it gives you instant feedback as to, do people like this? Are they interested in this? Are these the conversations they want to be having? So for sure, yeah, I think so.
I like that, man. So going back to Jesse's question, so I know Jesse's built business intimately, right? Like we served on a board together in Miami, and I come from the same world. He goes to Green Build every year. It's like the big green building conference, 40,000 people. I don't know if you've ever worked or anything like that, but it's got architects, engineers, construction workers, whatever, right? Like from politicians. Jesse works for developers, right? So like if Jesse were to create the developers mini summit and put together some heavy hitting developers from South Florida that are tackling how they're attracting sea level rise in South Florida, and put together like a niche event, right? Because sea level rise in South Florida is a thing. So a niche event around 3 developers and how they see sea level rise in South Florida that's leading the nation at the Washington, DC Green Build. Boom. He's got a brand activation. He's got his own little satellite event that he can promote.
And you could use that event that you're talking about to test pilot it, have the conversations, ask the questions, say, hey, what is this event missing? What are you not getting here, right? From experience to content to networking. And that's where it starts to navigate you to like, okay, could I put on my own event? Super specific. And just think, I mean, what people spend to be at a trade show, right? And I'm not even going to get into who actually drives value to themselves, but what you could spend to create your own event, have all the control, invite all the people that you want, and really make a tailored custom experience to what you and they want to talk about, to what you and they want to experience together, whether it's education, right? I mean, whether it's just networking, whatever that may be. I think there's tremendous opportunity for people depending on their size, right? I mean, obviously that's a size thing with a business and scale, if they can afford to go do that, and do they have the network to get 40, 50 people there? That would be a smaller event, but could be really profitable, right? Or is it 100, 200, 300? What does that look like?
Talk to me as your company's grown and you've taken over, you've got some like really, I know you're not going to give names, but you've got some clients that are really leaders in this space, that are really care about their clients. They are going to where the client is and setting up these activations. Talk to me about the difference in like mindset and benefits that they get from driving these brand activations where their clients are.
Yeah. So I think I'm a big believer in going to where your client is, right? So if you really understand your customer and you really understand who they are, then go to where they are. Where do they spend their time? It's the same piece in marketing, right? When we're talking about, you got to go digitally where they are. It's the same thing live. Where are these people? And then what kind of experience can you drive them to elevate your brand and engage them? So I think really good companies have a very good understanding of who their customers are and where those people are going in person. So that gives them the ideas of what to sponsor, what to just attend, where to exhibit, where to create build outs and kind of cement themselves. But it's all about the customer and all about where they are. But I think people have to start taking risks on getting in front of people where they are, where they're comfortable, and the things that they're doing.
So when I hear you say where people are, where they're comfortable, things that they're doing, I'm thinking there's a festival that isn't something that is B2B, but shit, man, I'm sure that these like people that go to Coachella are also by whatever other things, or figuring out something like that. Maybe not Coachella, maybe at a smaller scale, but like what are examples of going where people are, and what are examples of like an activation that you can think of that would make good sense? Give me like a business case for it and an ROI.
So I think B2C is obviously easier than B2B in this space, but the B2C are the best examples. We were talking before we got on air about Kate Spade and what they did in New York for Mother's Day. I mean, it's genius, right? So like they know their customer. You talk again, all starts.
Describe it.
Customer. Yeah. And then you can build from it. So moms buy Kate Spade. It's obviously a big demographic. And, they built a rooftop sort of space out that they built, and it had a whole floral arrangement. So when you walked in, Mother's Day, moms buy Kate Spade, flowers, and then they had the flowers in these coffee cups, and these coffee cups had these really like cute, fun sayings about moms, right? I mean, just spot on when you talk about who you're selling to and why, getting creative, making it memorable, making it mean something to them. So I think from a consumer standpoint, that's one good example. Another good example is we have a customer of ours where really the community is their customer to a large degree, most of the community. So they are able to go to community type events, buildings, whether it's like, you could say it's things like, sports facilities and fields and things like that, where people used to just do, like a Little League game, they'd put up like a banner or something, right? They'd sponsor a team. That's very, very basic. But they are building out spaces, things that provide value to the community, things that people will remember, things that people will really value when they're doing what they do every single weekend or day. And they're engraving their brand in those people by providing that value where they are, right? So if you're a part of the community, it's like, I watch my daughter play soccer all the time on weekends, right? And if you pile up a food truck there for me every weekend and serve awesome food, like I'm going to remember that. You know what I mean? Because I'm there. I'm starving every soccer game, right? So that's a good one. Or building out a deck, bleachers, spaces, things of that nature that are a little bit over the top. To answer the other piece of your question, like B2B is more complicated, right? Than that. And that's why people utilize trade shows and events. But I think one thing that people really have to open their mind up to is if they can really identify who their customer is, and you can start doing some research. Well, your customer is not just at your once a year, twice a year, big annual trade show. They have other spaces that they're in. They're attending summits. They're attending educational conferences. They're attending other trade shows. And just because they may not be in your direct space in terms of you being offered to exhibit, doesn't mean that you shouldn't exhibit. Doesn't mean that you shouldn't sponsor. Doesn't mean that you shouldn't get in front of them there. It's just a matter of doing the homework a little bit and really understanding the customer and where they are going, where are they getting their education, where are they learning, networking, meeting, and then getting creative to get in front of them in a physical sense.
Got it. So figure out what else they do and show up there to a certain extent, right?
Exactly. Yeah. 100%. I mean, that's how you engage in conversation. I mean, we have a lot of companies in our space. We just went to EMS, right? The Experiential Marketing Summit. Mm-hmm. There's companies there that are the main title sponsor now, and they weren't 5 years ago. So they're thinking outside the box to find their way there, and now they're killing it at that show. So you never know what's coming up. There's new associations. There's so much stuff going on. It's a matter of really understanding, again, got to know who your customer is and where are they going? What are they attending?
Explain that to me a little bit more. How does make that connection for me of being the main sponsor that wasn't there a couple of years ago? What's the lesson there?
I don't know. I think it's a matter of really understanding your industry in its entirety and really knowing the publications. Where are people getting information from, right? Because you can find these different avenues that maybe others have not found yet. And again, it all goes back to, we've talked about this recently at our company, which is saying to ourselves, like, okay, we have a really good feel on who our customer is. Well, we're in a lot of different industries too, a lot of industries we want to be. So how do we get in front of them? Where are they? What trade shows and events are they going to that maybe we should be exhibiting at to go get in front of those people or sponsor something or get into, is there an industry we want to be in, right? Because they have their own set of things. And if we can provide value and expertise to that industry, that space, and meet them, I mean, that's how you get in front of them. And maybe it's a little bit of a surprise, a little bit different, but you got to try stuff once in a while.
Yeah, that's a basic like networking thing for me, man. I was always, when I was in the construction industry in South Florida, I didn't like going to like the Latin Builders Association. I much rather go to the Lighthouse for the Blind luncheon and be the only contractor in the room versus in a room full of other contractors, right? So like to your point, if you want to get into another vertical, going and exhibiting at the bar association because you want to build trade show booths for lawyers would make as much sense or more to be the only trade show booth company that owns the, lawyer marketing conference. It's called
an event,
by the way.
Where are those lawyers attending events? Where are they getting an education at? What summits are they going to? Where are they experiencing? There's all different ways. B2B is more complicated, but B2B allows you to get creative, and not enough people are getting creative to get face to face.
Yeah.
But I think you need to be you need to be cautious, but you also need to be curious, looking for these avenues, right?
B2B also has the advantage that you generally have a higher ticket price, right? Like if you can throw 20K at something and if you land one client, it pays for it versus like B2C, you got to sell a lot of sneakers, right?
Yeah, you do.
Talk to me about ROI, man. How do you kind of like think about that stuff when it comes to these brand experiences?
So, I think number one, just in the trade show space, not enough people are worried about ROI, right? I mean, the things we hear all the time is, why you're going to this trade show, what you're trying to accomplish, do you track ROI? We've always gone to the show. And if we don't go to the show, people will think we're out of business. Like those are terrible excuses to go to a trade show and spend $300,000-$400,000 or $100,000. I don't care how much you're spending. So ROI is interesting when it comes to trade shows, events, brand activations. Not enough people track it. Some people overcomplicate it. There's a lot of softwares. There's a lot of people selling that data traction and being able to create ROI. But really, at the end of the day, I think it's about a connection between marketing and sales, which a lot of companies don't have. Good example, I have a buddy of mine, works for a big software company. Years back, they came into a trade show in Orlando. He's there. He's a rep. He's there to have conversations. He wasn't prepped, had no prep, just like flew in, just ready to go, right? Just walks in the booth like, what's next? And then after the show, no real contact, maybe like a lead list. So there's just a massive disconnect to create this ROI. And if you really want to create ROI, marketing's typically running the play at the trade show, right? But sales are involved, and then it has to pass the sales. So you don't need these overcomplicated systems, but you do have to have an understanding of like, what is the plan? What is the strategy? What are we trying to accomplish? And then how do we track this a little bit? I mean, how many opportunities did we get in the first 12 months after this trade show that came from this trade show? What were those conversations? And then I think the other piece too is how you contact people after the trade show. Not everybody that you talk to needs an email. Not everybody you talk to needs some random phone call from a salesperson. So that ROI is vital. I think the people that do track it, do look for it, do try to measure in some way, shape, or form, have a much better idea on what trade shows to go to, which ones not to go to, where to allocate budget. And it's just a way smarter way of doing things. But honestly, trying to get people to do it is tough. It's very tough, which is shocking. It's just hard.
Yeah, makes sense, man. Jesse's got a question, which is near and dear to my heart. What is the best digital engagement strategy that you have seen? What's really wowed you as far as like a digital version of what you're doing?
Yeah, great question. So digital was kind of always around during this, and people didn't know, is virtual going to work, all this and that. Once the pandemic hit, virtual just got jumped into, and people were trying all these different things. Virtual trade shows didn't work. The webinars, the seminars, the conferences, in that sense, they did work, but people got kind of zoomed out a little bit, but they're still working. What I would say is utilizing virtual and digital as a sales and marketing tool is something I don't think is going to go anywhere. Some companies built some really cool virtual platforms to engage their customer year round, right? So you go to a trade show, you go to an event, now you have this digital platform that you can send to them. It's basically a website on steroids. What do you want it to do? What do you want it to accomplish? Maybe it doesn't convert people at all, but it's this brand experience that you're delivering to them that educates them. Maybe it's your customers, they can give feedback on it. Again, it all goes back to what these customers, what do they need? Where are your problem areas? And then you can use digital to solve it. A lot of medical device companies built out these really cool digital spaces to showcase new product. That was one that I had kind of seen. We actually had a customer of ours that we worked with had a really unique idea. And what they wanted to do is they wanted to use it for recruiting. Big global company, recruiting people all over the world. And they wanted to build a virtual experience pretty much as a marketing tool to recruit rather than say, hey, check out our website or check out our LinkedIn or this and that. They built this really cool experience that they sent to people, and then they got to go through it, which they felt like made an impression.
Makes a lot of sense. So kind of like apps / website / kind of.
It's purely a website when you build it, right?
Okay.
There's like a link website. You can control the back end analytics. You can see who goes where, what they click, what they don't. It is genuinely a website on steroids. And then of course, a lot of the graphics, the resolution, like you can create some really beautiful virtual stuff in this space. But genuinely, I think what will last and what will stay is the webinar side, this type thing, and people running those in conferences, but companies creating sales and marketing virtual experiences that they use as a tool that they can deploy in marketing, deploy via sales, deploy for recruitment, I think is something that will not go away and will stick. And it's just a matter of building something that functions for who you want to use it and what you want them to use it for.
Awesome, man. Matt, engaging year round, right? Like Deb is a Mighty Networks expert. She's talking about it's a great platform, pre-event, post-event, and year round learning connection. Are you seeing communities built out of these kind of like experiences, or is there another alternative way to kind of keep the dialogue going that you see as a feasible way of continuing the whatever experience you started or the trade show or whatever, continuing the conversation year round?
Yeah. So, look, I think that's a little bit of a marketing play, right? How do you formulate this community and this experience and then roll it into a live and then roll it into digital back on the post side? And so it's almost like a big campaign that you could run. So what are the digital touch points, right? With people nowadays with QR codes and phones, how are you touching them before and after the event and carrying it through? I find sometimes there's often too much. People try to connect the dots too much. They just lose you. But a simple message from start to finish with an event in between, but getting that touch point afterwards, I think is huge at times. I really do.
Makes a lot of sense, man. Matt, this is part 1 of 2, dude. I am pumped for the next time that we do this and talking about like the one-to-one networking piece of how to create the relationships at these things. In the meantime, if people want to connect with you, they want to connect with Rockway, what's the best way to reach you? Anything you want to promote, anything like that?
Man, we are on LinkedIn. We're on Facebook. We're on Instagram. We're on everything. Just Rockway Exhibits and Events, and would love to hear from anybody. My email is just matt@rockwayexhibits.com. I would love feedback on this. I would love questions on this. I know the B2B brand experiences, trade shows and events, a broad topic, and there's a ton involved in it. So I would just love to hear from anybody that has questions that I could field, because the more questions I can field and the more specific they are, the more I learn. And, I think the more value that I can drive.
All right, man. I love that, dude. Well, listen, I'm pumped to do more of this with you, right? Like I love the energy that happens between you and me every single time we talk. I'm really pumped to pick your head on how to talk to people at trade shows and how to start conversations. Because I know
like you're going to be the one that you're going to want to tell me how to do that. But I think it's important for people attending and stuff,
Yeah. Well, I've got a lot of thoughts on it, man, but I know that I'm sure that there's something inside of you that I haven't thought of that I'm definitely going to be wowed by, man. So I'm really pumped up about it. Thanks for doing this, bud.
No, dude, that was a blast. I appreciate you.